वो बुनियादी तौर पर बच्चे ने जो कुछ सीखा है वो एट द एंड ऑफ ए सेशन, एट द एंड ऑफ ए क्लास, at the end of a year, just to check whether the students have demonstrated their knowledge in the paper or not. So that was the focus. Now other approaches to assessment, like assessment is for learning. When we look at assessment as for learning, how this is different from assessment as of learning. When you will look at this particular concept of assessment as for learning, then you will come to know what is the basic difference. So this assessment approach, assessment is for learning, is a metaphorically expressing assessment that is focusing on not only the purpose of assessment for grading and promotion, pass or fail, but the purpose of this assessment is purely focusing on how students have learned. What are the challenges that the students are facing during their teaching learning? How can we help students to learn more powerfully? How can we help students to develop their clear understanding of the topics which we discuss in the classroom? So this is something different sort of assessment. And we call this assessment as formative assessment. Formative assessment is basically focusing on the concept of feedback, the concept of student learning. It's not focusing on the only outcome of learning, but also the process of learning, how a learner is engaged with the learning activity in the classroom, how a learner is engaged the learning activity at home, how a learner is engaged in project works. In this way, an independent learning should occur. How a learner is given a task that helps a student to apply the knowledge, whatever the knowledge that the learner has remembered and understood at a basic level. So how you as a teacher guide your student to apply and analyze the knowledge that the child has remembered and understood at classroom level. So when you will engage students at this level, this means that according to Bloom's taxonomy, you are focusing at not only simply lower order thinking skills through remembering and understanding, but also you are focusing through this assessment, focusing on applying and analyzing that knowledge in the practical life. So in this way, here teachers' activities would be a kind of project work. Here the teachers' activities would be a kind of reflection on a particular learning. So in this way, your activities, your assessment approaches, your assessment activities would be different as compared to the assessment as of learning that previously we learned about its concepts and its limitations. Here, this is something interactive. Here, this is something as earlier in the interactive session, you come up with your own ideas, whatever you have learned from the previous session assessment as of learning. And most of you, Munir, Alia, Pratulain, and so many students, Asha, so you discussed thoroughly, Shagufa, like that. So what was your concept of assessment as of learning? And you came up with your own views. And on those views, I gave you my own feedback. So this sort of evidence of students' learning that we gathered using a formative assessment is a kind of process of learning. In this process of learning, both teacher and students become in an interactive way, become in a communication, and they collaborate with each other, they communicate with each other, they share their learning with each other, they give their feedback, they exchange their comments, their views, and they share their understanding, they share their knowledge. So in this way, with this sort of assessment, which is mostly is possible in schools where teachers are well trained, where teachers are exposed to a modern philosophical understanding of education, that is a practical interest of education. A practical interest of education is an education that believes in Devian concept of education as an experience. When you look at the Devian concept of education as an experience, this is learning by doing, learning with experience, learning with practical engagement with the things. Practically, you perform things, you demonstrate things, whatever you have learned, and you just focus on your learning, your remembering, and your understanding to apply in your real life situations. Whatever the knowledge you gain from the books, whatever the knowledge you gain from the teachers in the lectures, in the classrooms, in the schools, so you start thinking about how to apply that knowledge in your practical life. So here at this particular moment of time, when teachers and students engaged with a sort of assessment that is formative, uh, its purpose is to enhance learning levels of students. Its purpose is to develop confidence in students to come up with their own learning, to apply that knowledge in their real life situations, to start reflecting at the knowledge they have gained through schooling. Here, this purpose is to focus on more and more learning that is practically engaging students in their real life situations. So that is not only for grading and scoring, but that is purely for assessment, is for the students' powerful learning. So this image is a very powerful image. Assessment is for learning. For learning is metaphorically, its focus is on a wider interest of education. That is a modern interest of education. That is a modern philosophy. That is the reformative philosophy that believes in education is not limited to just learn and understand, but the purpose of education is to apply that knowledge you have learned and analyze that knowledge, whether that knowledge is good for you or that knowledge is not good for you. So when you will be able to analyze something in the process of analysis, so your knowledge will expand, your knowledge will enhance. So this is how this assessment is focusing. Now we will just move to yet another very important assessment, that is assessment as through learning. When we talk about assessment as through learning, that means that you are focusing on something more than a a kind of modern assessment, a kind of assessment is of learning. Rather, you are going beyond that level. And what is going beyond that level is assessment, metaphorically, assessment is through learning. Assessment is through learning is yet another metaphorical expression. What is the meaning of assessment as through learning? That is something very interesting. It is an assessment that starts at the same time when teaching starts. You can understand assessment as of learning starts when teaching finishes. ends. That's why that was an assessment as off learning was an add-on activity. But here assessment as through learning is something very interesting, something unique. That means that you are focusing on students learning through very interactive way of teaching. You teach something, at the same time you assess your learners. You go back to the teaching and come to assessment and go back to the teaching. This is a kind of interactive assessment approach. So that's why it's a through learning. Assessment is through learning. And because of this through learning means you learn, you teach, you learn, you relearn, and you engage everyone. It's a transformative assessment. It's the highest level of interest of education. When you look at the purpose of this assessment, that goes back to the philosophy of emancipatory interest of education. It's a postmodern image because the emancipatory interest of education is a transformative education that believes in liberation of learner, liberation of uh, a student from the boundaries of limited knowledge, from the boundaries of limited ways of learning. Rather, it encourages a student to not only restrict it to apply and analyze knowledge, but it helps, it empowers learner to uh, to evaluate the knowledge and create new knowledge. So according to Bloom's taxonomy, when you look at the pyramid of um, learning from remembering and understanding, that is called lower order thinking skills, to upward as middle order thinking skills, that is applying and analyzing. And above that, when you go to the top of the pyramid, that is evaluating and creating new knowledge. So this assessment approach, assessment is through learning, uh, focuses on evaluating and creating. So this means that the purpose of this assessment approach is highly at higher order thinking skills, is focusing on developing higher order thinking skills in students. For example, when you uh, engage a student to remember and understand at classroom level, and then encourage students to work on a project to apply that knowledge in their real life and come with some results. And then you at another level, you encourage students to evaluate your project, self-evaluation, evaluate the project that you have completed, you have come up with some ideas, and then create something new. That is higher order thinking skills to develop. So if you in past in your schools and currently in schools which you are engaged, somewhere you are teaching, somewhere you are learning, and somewhere your siblings, your sisters and brothers, or even your children, if you, some of you have children, so check those people, what their school practices are, how they are engaging with assessment. Is that make sense? Are they practicing these three different levels of assessment approaches? They're focusing on only assessment as off learning, or they are also using assessment as for learning. The question is, do they use assessment as through learning, which is according to Bloom's the highest level of learning to check? So this is an inclusive approach to assessment. Here you have to understand very clearly one thing that is very, very important. In this inclusive approach, we do not exclude assessment as off learning and for learning. That is why it is inclusive. We use the former two approaches as well here. We use assessment as off learning. At the end of a class, we test the students. During the class, we test the students. And during the teaching, we engage learners through assessment. So in this way, your assessment and teaching becomes part and parcel, becomes a kind of interactive engagement. You and your students become co-teachers. You and your students become co-learners. You also learn from your students learn from you. You teach your student teaches you. So in this way, this is an inclusive approach. This is a kind of co-learning activity where teacher and students become intellectually friends. They exchange their ideas. They become colleagues for a joint venture, that is assessment as through learning. So the purpose is to learn from each other. The purpose is to strengthen their views. The purpose is to challenge their prior knowledge. The purpose is to develop new perspectives according to Jack Meziro. When transformative learning happens, when you will come up with a kind of new perspective, develop new perspective, develop new idea, and reject your own old idea, reject your own old perspective. And how you do that is because of a very rigorously engagement with your exploration of that particular knowledge through critically reflecting on your knowledge, critically reflecting at your ideas. And when you reach at that level of understanding, at that level of knowledge, so you become a transformative learner. Transformative learner, to practice, you need to go through all those stages. And when you will reach at that sort of level, so that is the highest level of learning, where the whole process of learning, that both learner and teacher feel ownership in their learning. So because they learn from each other, they learn from their own mistakes, and they critique themselves. They, rather than critiquing others, you critique your own self. You critique your own approach to learning. You critique your own approach to developing a particular concept. And then, as a result of using your brain, that's very linked with the philosophical views of Quranic guidance. So अल्लाह की उन निशानियों को जानना, and then exploring knowledge and looking at the signs of uh, signs of knowledge around yourself, and then engaging with the process of deep thinking, deeper level of thought-provoking ideas. How can you develop with those things, and how you use your brain, how you develop your wisdom, and you become a wise man and wise woman. How you do that? So that becomes something very laborious work, intellectually laboring. That is very, very important for this assessment to experience. So that's how you can understand this emancipatory interest of education and postmodern image of assessment is through learning. So raising questions and they engage themselves in activities, it's not one fixed time. It's ongoing process. It's not somewhere you stop, you learn something, you came up with some powerful concept of learning, and you think that it's enough. No, it's not like that. You every time, engage yourself with the process of learning. You every time engage with the process of knowing. So in this way, you can develop your powerful image of assessment as through learning. So in a very simple words, I will conclude here. I will summarize the concept of assessment as for learning and through learning very briefly. Now listen very carefully. So before I go to your question answer session and seek your comments and reflections, I will here conclude once again for you. So in assessment is for learning, we focused on uh, how a child is applying the knowledge and analyzing the knowledge in the practical life. The focus of teacher is on this sort of Bloom's taxonomy, middle order thinking skills to develop. And for that, teacher uses feedbacks, teacher engages students to give their response after while after some time during teaching. And then this concept of feedback is important. The concept of feedback and the encouragement of a student is important in assessment as for learning. So because its purpose is not for grading and scoring, the purpose is for improving learning. Its purpose is for enhancing better learning of the students. And beyond that, assessment is through learning. Teaching and learning becomes an interactive process. They 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 both these processes become supportive to each other. While teaching, you come to the assessment, and the assessment supports what to teach and how to teach, and then you go to teaching and then come to assessment and go to teaching, and vice versa. So in this way, you engage with the process of co-learning and co-developing. So here teacher and students become critical friends. They become critical friends, they support each other, they learn from each other, and they build on their knowledge, they share their knowledge, they own the process of learning. So they develop a kind of organizational citizenship behavior. So citizenship behavior means here they become well aware of each other's learning. They conscious about their learning of everyone in the classroom, learning of each other. So students and the teacher become very critically interactive colleagues here in this whole process. So in this way, you can understand the philosophy of this assessment as through learning. So you can understand this is totally different as compared to the assessment as